Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Hope you're all having a great day. And with free agency starting in less than 3 hours, um, I figured I would give my free agency predictions for some of the top 30 players who are hitting the free market. And with no further ado, let's get into my predictions. Starting off with a quarterback who will be on the top of plenty of people's radars and Malik Willis. And I think he ends up in Miami. I know there's a lot of I know there's a lot of debate on whether the Green Bay connections in Miami will lead Willis to being there, but I don't really see many other teams being a factor. People say the Jets, but I kind of see them signing Malik Willis to like them signing Justin Fields last year, like trying to bet on a high upside guy. And if you're Malik Willis, why would you sign with the Jets when you saw what happened with Justin Fields? And I get the Falcons or Cardinals could be options, but Miami just makes the most sense. Like Malik Willis, seems like he's going to get a pretty big contract. Which yes, Miami doesn't have a lot of cap space, but I feel like Willis makes the most sense in Miami. So I think he ends up going to South Beach and being the new Dolphins quarterback because, as officially of today, the Dolphins are officially cutting Tua on Wednesday at 4 o'clock when the new league year starts. Went on to Jalen Phillips. All reports say that he's going to be back in Philly. I mean, I could see, if he does hit the open market, which is in a couple hours, so he could possibly hit the open market. I could see him ending up going to Dallas because, they've run in an Eagles code, so he might want to follow there. Although Dallas did just trade for Sean Gary, so maybe that means they're going in a different direction in free agency. But all indications say he's going to be back in Philly. Unless something drastic happens, I think Jalen Phillips will be an Eagle for at least 2026, if not into the future. But maybe some team, comes out with a crazy offer and he ends up going there and leaving the Eagles. Moving on to Tyler Linderbaum, another guy I think ends up back on this team. I mean, I know the Ravens haven't given him a extension yet, but all indications say that the Ravens will be prioritizing him, especially after you trade for Max Crosby. You get, the biggest need on your defense is now filled. You can prioritize that offensive line, and look, Daniel Vallely, who was horrible, is going to be a free agent. Andrew Voorhees, who was also pretty bad, they're going to want to replace. You can't replace your entire interior offensive line. Like the Chargers, who we'll get to Zion Johnson later, I don't think they're I think it's more likely that the Ravens would do everything they can to retain Tyler Linderbaum and then just replace those guards instead of having to replace every interior offensive lineman, because that's never good when you have to replace three starters on your offensive line, no matter how good or bad they are. Moving on to number 4 with Kyler Murray. All indications seems like he's going to end up in Minnesota. On reports early on in the offseason after the Super Bowl, that a lot of the quarterbacks who were going to be free agents or going to get cut wanted to be a Minnesota Viking, which makes sense. I mean, Kevin O'Connell, outside of J.J. McCarthy, who did play well down the stretch, but he's been able to get the best out of every quarterback he's had. And Kyler, who isn't going to be available, you can't officially sign him until the new league year on Wednesday at 4 p.m. So this is probably a deal that whoever you can't officially sign him until then, which means it probably more than likely will have to wait until then. But I think Kyler's top list is Minnesota up there. I was saying the Jets for a while, but I think New York more so would go veteran route and have them start and then try to go after and draft a guy next year. So I just think Kyler, all indications point him to going to Minnesota. And unless, that's all smoke screen and Kyler ends up going to New York or Miami or somewhere else, maybe Atlanta, the Rams I've seen thrown out, which I don't hate. I think he ends up in Minnesota. Went on to Alec Pierce, which there's been a lot of talk about where he's going to end up. I think most people thought he would be back as a Colt, but with them tackling Daniel Jones and so far not getting extension with Pierce, although I did see a rumor that Pierce is waiting for Daniel Jones to sign a contract extension before staying in Indy. But if he hits the open market, teams are going to be giving him a lot of money. And I don't think he would turn like I know Chris Godwin did it last year when it came back to the Bucks, but this is Pierce's second contract, which is always like that huge contract you get in the NFL after your rookie deal. And I don't think he would pass up that money just because he wants to stay in Indianapolis. I think he would want to go out and get a pretty big bag. And the Chargers, who Quinn Johnson could be on the move. You have McConkey and Trey Harris, but not much outside of that. And I think the Chargers, with a lot of money, he can go to plenty of teams. But the Chargers, who have like 98 million, I want to say, in um, cap space or around that number, could go out and say, "We'll give you whatever you want," and he ends up going to the Chargers. I could see the Raiders, the Titans, Pats, Washington possibly. Moving on to Trey Hendrickson. I mean, I know I did say they traded for Rashawn Gary, but I think Dallas is still going to be in the edge rusher market. I think all indications point to um, them going out and making big splashes on the defensive side, especially since you tag Pickens, meaning you have them at least for this year under contract. I think they're going to go out and make big splashes on the defensive side, and they were in on Max Crosby, couldn't get it done, probably because they didn't want to give up two firsts, um, because they probably wanted to keep, because they already have given up one first in the 2027 draft, because it's in the Quentin Williams deal at the deadline. It was like a better pick between them and the Packers. So I don't think they wanted to give away any more picks. But I think they're going to go after a guy, and I think it makes more sense if Dallas was going after Crosby. They're going after veteran edge rushers and not the younger guys. Because if they were going after, like, if they were trying to trade, like, if they were trying to like get Jalen Phillips or Adafe away, some of the younger, even Blaine Mafe, some of the younger edge rusher guys, I feel like they wouldn't have tried to go after Crosby. Shows they want impact players now. And Hendrickson, who we know is not going to be in a Bengals uniform next year, I think he ends up in Dallas. We're on to Devin Lloyd, who priced his way out of Jacksonville with a career year now. Was it a career year you can build off of, or was it a career year that makes him look like one of the worst free agents a year from now? I think Devin Lloyd ends up in Washington. I think like Washington has so much cap space. Adam Peters needs to attack free agency, bring in defenders, because the offense, while does need to make improvements, has their quarterback, wide receiver. They'll go after a running back and possibly tight end offensive line, but like the offense is more so figured out than the defense. And I think Adam Peters is going to go on a spending spree trying to bring in elite defenders. And I think Devin Lloyd is one of them. I think they need better linebacker play. Like, Bobby Wagner is fine as a veteran guy. Ricky Louvu is more so a pass rusher than a true linebacker, and I think Adam Peters is going to attack free agency, and Lloyd I think is the top guy, and then next guy Odafe Oweh, who I was gonna say to the Ravens, but when you trade for Matt Crosby, it kind of makes that you wouldn't bring back away, even though he was under Jesse Minter. So I think he goes to Washington. I mean, I think the Commanders go after free agents, bring in some guys on big contracts. I'm talking about like 90, 100 plus million contracts. So they can be able to bring in these guys. Not saying, Devin Lloyd and Odafe Oweh are going to get those huge contracts, but I think it looks likely that a team might overpay for their services. And I think Washington could be a team that could overpay for guys just because they like are trying to get back to winning after a disastrous 2025. Moving on to Kenneth Walker, not going to be back in Seattle. He clearly priced his way out, um, especially when they didn't tag him, which was expected, but Seattle was going to keep Kenneth Walker. I think they would have tagged him more than trying to extend him. And I think he ends up in New York. The Giants clearly are looking for a veteran running back in a veteran running back free agent class where there's a lot of guys like Travis Etienne, Rico Dowdle, and plenty of other guys who, could be not a true RB1, but could be a guy used, with somebody else. And Cam Scatterwood was coming off a big injury. They had Tyrone Tracy, but I think the Giants could be big attackers. And Kenneth Walker says he will give the Giants a meeting. So clearly he's open to going to New York, and I think he could end up pricing himself out of like the Chiefs or other free agent running back needy teams, and the Giants could swoop in and snag him. Went on to Boye Mafe, another Seahawk. I think he goes to New England. I think Kayvon Chaison's going to be leaving. He priced himself out of New England. Maybe, um, who knows? But I think they're gonna go after a guy like Boye Mafe, who you know, might take lesser, like might what's the word? Like he might not cost as much money as Kayvon Chaisson. Like Mafe, still a really talented player, and whoever signs him will um get a great edge rusher who can get after the quarterback and be really talented. But I don't think he's gonna make that much money. I think New England, who has cap space, I think could go out and sign him to like a 2 or 3 year deal. And kind of like what they did with Harold Landry last year, where like a guy who not going to make as much money as the top tier at his position, but is still going to be really talented. And I think Mafe could end up um ending up in New England, maybe Dallas, maybe the Chargers. Who knows? There's a lot of edge rusher needy teams that could end up going after him. Rashid Shaheed, he's the only Seattle free agent of these three guys that I mentioned that I think will end up back in Seattle. I think like there were Bills rumors, but when you trade for DJ Moore, you're not going to go out there and sign Shaheed. I know there could be other teams that could, like the Raiders maybe reunites with Clint Kubiak in Vegas, which I don't hate, but I think he's the bigger priority than Walker or Mafe. And I think Shaheed ends up returning to the Emerald City and being that elite returner and deep threat for Seattle as they try to keep this offense, you know, still one of the best in the league despite losing Kubiak to Vegas. Moving on to AVT, I've debated on who I think he could go there. I think, yeah, I have debated where I think he ends up. I think he could go to a team like the Ravens or maybe the Steelers. Like he could end up on another team if like the new regime of the Jets doesn't want to bring him back, and you could get him on a short term contract. Maybe the Chargers want to bring him in, but I think the Jets want to prioritize him. Like they tagged Brees Hall, hoping to get a contract extension done with him. I think they want to keep this offensive consistency. I mean, they also have $73 million in cap space, so they're going to definitely try and bring in guys, and I think they want to keep this offense consistent. You know, you have a young offensive line that, when healthy, is one of the best, and I think the Jets are going to make it a priority to bring him back. But I could see, you know, maybe he wants to be in a different situation. Maybe the Jets don't want to bring him back. He could go to a guard needy team that could say, we could bring him on like a 2 year contract, maybe a 1 year prove it deal, and see healthy AVT because he, when healthy, is one of the best guards in the league. And he could end up leaving the Jets, but I think he ends up staying in New York and protecting whoever the quarterback is in the long term. Moving on to David Edwards of the Bills. I think he also goes back to Buffalo. They were able to bring back Connor McGovern, so you keep him as your center. They have Osiris Torrance at one of the guards. You're probably going to want to. I mean, if they don't bring back David Edwards, they could address guard because you still have 4/5 of your offensive line coming back. But I think David Edwards, like I think Brandon Beane, wanting to keep this offense consistently together, I think is going to make it a priority to bring him back. And I think they're going to go after free agent wide receivers and make a big splash. But I think he's going to prioritize David Edwards. Moving on to Mike Evans, who I think for the first time in his career might end up leaving Tampa Bay. I have him going to Baltimore. He could end up on the Niners, the Chiefs, a team that needs another wide receiver that's contending for a Super Bowl. He already said he wants that. He could end up back in Tampa Bay. You know, a lot of people speculated a couple years ago that Evans would leave. He didn't. Maybe he ends up leaving this time. Who knows? But I think the Ravens, who after they get Tyler Linderbaum extended and kept on the team, I think they're going to try to bring in another wide receiver. I would like the Ravens to bring in a younger guy as a Ravens fan, just because you have Zay, maybe Rashad Bateman, could have a bounce back year, but the Ravens kind of always just bring in these older veteran receivers, and I would just kind of rather them bring in a younger guy who could still produce for multiple years and not be like a 1 year guy that isn't really that effective in the offense. Moving on to Jamel Dean, the second buck. And I think, again, Washington, you release Marshawn Lattimore, which was expected. But you have Trey Amos, who had a nice rookie year. You have Mikey Singer still, who maybe can return to form the way he was his rookie year. But Dean, I think, who's the top corner in this free agency class, I think will have a lot of suitors, and I think he'll price his way out of the Bucks, who are getting probably ready to extend Zion McCollum, or they might have actually done that last year. I'm not sure, but Dean, I think, will price his way out of Tampa, and I think the Commanders, like I said, they're gonna go all out, bringing defenders in to beef up this unit. they're probably also going to go offensive. So they're not just going to go after defenders, but I think um, Dean more than definitely will be on a new team. I think Washington could be the right fit. Moving on to K. Dot, the third consecutive Buck, which that's crazy. We had three straight Seahawks and now three straight Bucks. And I think he ends up back in Tampa Bay. I think he could go to like Philly, maybe trying to think like maybe Miami. Like he could end up going somewhere else and being, Tampa doesn't want to give him that contract, but I think the Bucks are gonna want to try to keep one of these guys, at least one, maybe multiple of these guys from leaving the team. And I think Otten is the more than likely one. He's the youngest of the three, and Dean seems like he's definitely going to be leaving Tampa. So then it comes down between Evans and Otten. And Otten seems more likely to be about in 2026 than Mike Evans. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Mike stays in Tampa and I look like a complete idiot for ever saying he would leave the Bucks. Moving on to Isaiah Likely, who is definitely going to be off the Ravens next year. I'm sad about. I don't really understand why we extended Mark Andrews over Likely. I think Likely. I can see him end up going to Denver. Kenyon Sadiq has clearly risen up the board and will go a lot higher than Denver's pick 30. So unless the Broncos are trading up to draft him, it's clear they're going to have to go in a different direction at tight end. Maybe they get one later on in the draft, day 2, day 3, but why not go after Likely? Like they have the cap space. I know they signed Evan Ingram last year, so you might be like, well, would Denver really go out and draft another receiving tight end? But I think Likely, who's younger, has proven that he can be a tight end one. Denver should give him an opportunity. I could also see the Giants, reuniting with Harbaugh, the Eagles, maybe the Bucks if they lose K. There's a lot of teams, maybe the Dolphins come in and bring in Likely, but I'm predicting Denver. But on to Wan'Dale Robinson, who I think ends up in Tennessee. His former head coach, Brian Daboll, who was a part of the process that drafted Wan'Dale back in 2022. They've had that connection since then. He's now the Titans OC. And if Tennessee doesn't get Alec Pierce, which they could, all indications say they're going to go after um, Wan'Dale, and I think it'd be a phenomenal fit. I mean, they're going to have to get a legit wide receiver one because I don't think Robinson is that. But in that Dayball offense, it'll give Cam Ward another pass catcher and give the Titans a young, explosive wide receiver to help them out. I think they're also going to maybe look at running backs, possibly look at tight ends since Chig Okonkwo is a free agent. Um, so I think Tennessee, all indications say that they're going to go after Wan'Dale Robinson. The Brian Daboll connection is there, and I think he ends up being a Tennessee Titan. Moving on to Rasheed Walker, the premier offensive lineman, I think, because I think Linderbaum's back in Baltimore, and I know I talked about a couple guards, but I think they end up staying with their teams. So I think Walker's like the premier offensive lineman on the market, and I think he ends up in Cleveland. They trade for Titus Howard, clearly showing that they're going to need to improve his offensive line. And like DeJuan Jones, who would be their left tackle now, is very much injury prone. So they're going to need somebody out there who can be more stable for their future quarterback, whether it's Watson, Shador, Dylan Gabriel, and somebody else. And I think Rasheed Walker, who I think will end up leaving Green Bay, it's clear that they're probably going to put Jordan Morgan at left tackle and kind of solidify him there for hopefully the future. So I think Rasheed Walker ends up in Cleveland, but he can maybe go to New England. He could go to Houston, maybe. Like, there's a lot of teams that need tackle play, and he could end up going to a lot of those teams. I'm predicting Cleveland. Not a Jermaine Illuminor, who I think ends up back in New York. I think the offensive line play was a lot better in 2025 than it was the last couple of seasons. And John Harbaugh knows what great offensive line play can do for a team. And I think he's going to want to keep Illuminor opposite of Andrew Thomas, who, when healthy, is one of the best left tackles. They're going to have to, improve the interior offensive line, but I like you want to lose a guy like Illuminor, who would then give this team another hole that they would have to fill. Moving on to Travis Etienne, who I think ends up in KC. I think another Jaguar who priced himself out after an amazing year. I think unlike Devin Lloyd, Etienne will still have great productions because, in 2022 and 2023, he was still like one of the best running backs in the league. Like, he had over 1,000 yards both years. It's just he had a down 24 year and then went back over 25. So he's done it more consistently than Devin Lloyd. And the Chiefs are going to be in the running back market. I think Kenneth Walker could end up exceeding the value they might want to pay a running back, and Etienne could be that right fit, especially if Jeremiah Love does go higher to like the Titans or the Saints. The Chiefs are going to need to look for a running back, and Etienne definitely could be the right fit and give this Chiefs offense an elite running back they haven't had since 2018 with Kareem Hunt before his thing that led him to being kicked off the team. Moving on to John Franklin Myers, who I think ends up in Houston. Like, there's a connection because Robert Saleh, who now the coach of the Tennessee Titans, but Tennessee doesn't really need. They could end up because they traded away T'Vondre Sweat, so I could see the Titans. But I'm thinking DeMeco Ryans, who coached under Robert Saleh, like, he took over when Saleh became the Jets head coach, and Houston needs interior defensive line. They do need interior offensive line, but they do need interior defensive line as well. And I think JFM, who I think will end up leaving Denver, maybe they end up getting a contract extension done before free agency. I think there's a lot of suitors who need that interior defensive line pressure. And Houston, one of those teams who I think could make a big splash. They just extended Danielle Hunter another year, clearly showing that they prioritize keeping their guys no matter how many years are left on the contract. But I think Franklin Myers would be a phenomenal fit and would give this Houston defense, another impact player on that defensive line and really fortify that defense because they have great edge play. They have, good linebacker play and probably the best secondary in the league. They just need to improve interior, and I think JFM would be the perfect fit. Moving on to Zion Johnson, who I think the Chargers will re-sign. They brought in Tyler Biadasz to be their center after Bradley Bozeman thankfully retired, but they're going to need to replace two guards. And would you really let both of those guys go? Like, Becton's not coming back, but would you really let both guys go needing to bring in two new guards? Or bring back Zion Johnson on like a 1-2 year deal? Maybe playing better, next to a better center and a healthy Rashawn Slater. Maybe Zion Johnson's a lot better in 2026. Although the Chargers might just say, let's let him go and let's try to bring in somebody else. But I think LA re-signs him. They have a lot of cap space, so they're gonna have to do something with it. And I think Zion Johnson could fit with the Chargers back. Moving on to moving on to Romeo Dobbs. And I think he ends up at Indy. I think he is going to leave Green Bay. And if the Colts do lose Alec Pierce, they're gonna need to bring in somebody, not really to replace him, but to like they're gonna have to replace his production. Like they're gonna have to bring in another receiver. Is what I'm trying to say. Not replace Alec Pierce the player, because Dobbs and Pierce are completely different players. Um, so Dobbs will end up hitting the open market, and if Pierce gets a bag and Indy can't match that deal, they could just settle for a guy like Dobbs, maybe Robinson, maybe a guy like Mike Evans, or maybe a different guy like Tyreek Hill, Hollywood Brown, Jawan Jennings, Kendrick Bourne. Um, or maybe the Colts can get on a cheaper deal than what Alec Pierce is going to get, and I think Dobbs could end up in Indy as that replacement. But who knows? Maybe they release Michael Pittman, are able to give Pierce that type of money, and then it's Pittman who's not the Colts receiver. Dobbs could still end up being a Colt if that happens, but I'm saying if Pierce does leave in free agency, and he's going to need to replace his production, and Dobbs, I think, could in that offense in Indianapolis, could flurry next to Pittman, Downs, Warren, and JT. Went on to Brian Cook, who I'm going to say go to Chicago. The Bears have a lot of free agents at that safety position with Jaquan Brisker, Kevin Byard, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and if at least one, maybe multiple of those guys leave, they're gonna have to replace them. And it seems like maybe the safeties aren't going to be available when they're picking, so maybe they go out and bring in Brian Cook, who coming from the Chiefs defense, knowing to be technically sound, like Steve Spagnuolo has those guys always playing the best. And I think Chicago, who might end up losing a couple guys at the safety position, could end up trying to bring in another free agent safety like they did with Kevin Byard a couple years ago. And I think Brian Cook, who clearly has, more upside on the second deal, I think could leave KC and could definitely join Chicago, but maybe goes to the Jets or some other secondary needy team. Although New York did just trade for Minka Fitzpatrick, so maybe it's less likely. Moving on to Isaac Seumalo, who I think is back in Pittsburgh. He could, like a couple of the other guards, could enter free agency and a team could give him a boatload of money and they could leave. Or maybe their current team wants to move on and bring in somebody else. I would say Amalo has been pretty good for Pittsburgh, and this offensive line this past year was pretty solid. Like Roderick Jones took another step and clearly can be that left tackle. They have the three guys from the 24 class, and Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick, and Troy Fatanu, who all, when healthy, are pretty good. And then Seumalo, the veteran of the group, has been pretty good. And I think Pittsburgh would not want to let, because good offensive line play rarely ever hit free agency. Guards more than tackles. Like guards and center more than tackles, but good offensive linemen usually rarely hit free agency. And I feel like Pittsburgh has to keep him if they want to have the same amount of offensive success, especially now under Mike McCarthy. Moving on to Jalen Watson, who I think is back in KC. They traded away Trent McDuffie to the Rams, clearly signaling that they weren't going to pay him and were going to need to pay other guys. And I think Jalen Watson's one of those guys who could be maybe the next L'Jarius Sneed. I mean, a late round guy who, after that veteran, because remember Travarius Ward left in I think 2022 to the Niners, I want to say, something like that, and then Sneed stepped up and was one of the best corners um, in football the next couple of years before being traded to Tennessee, and then more than likely will be cut this offseason. So I think Jalen Watson, they're gonna want to keep him, and maybe he's the new corner one. Maybe they address it with one of their 2 first-round picks. So Watson, I think, ends up back in KC, but who knows? Maybe a team out there who needs corner help just outbids the Chiefs, and Watson ends up leaving. Went on to Kwity Paye. I think he could end up in LA. I could also see him in Seattle, maybe Cincinnati. Like I could see him ending up like on a team that loses a top pass rusher in free agency. That might win a guy who's not gonna get at like as much money as those guys, but can still be really productive. And I think, LA brings back Khalil Mack on another 1 year deal. Odafe Oweh could price himself out of the Chargers market, and maybe they would rather bring in a guy like Paye, maybe Chason, maybe Boye Mafe, as like a guy who's not going to make as much as Oweh, but can still be as productive and give the Chargers another pass rusher to help this defense still be really good, even without Jesse Minter. Went on to Alontae Taylor, who I think ends up leaving the Saints. I think he ends up in New York. Yeah, just mentioned they trade for Minkah Fitzpatrick, but they still need corner help. And Taylor, who had a really good final year on his rookie contract, is going to, make a huge amount this offseason. And a Jets team that had no interceptions this past year, who, traded away their top 2 defenders and then traded away Jermaine Johnson a couple of weeks ago, need to bring in, difference makers on the defensive side. And I think Taylor would be a phenomenal fit. And maybe if they get this defense figured out and the offense is better than it was last year, maybe Aaron Glenn isn't fired and the Jets enter his 3rd year with a rookie quarterback and a future that is much brighter than most people probably would believe because of the Jets. And then finally, the last guy I'm going to mention, K'Lavon Chaisson, had a tremendous year in New England, really showed out after being considered a draft bust, but having some productive years in the last couple of years. And I think he ends up back in Vegas. They trade away Max Crosby, so clearly are going to need to bring in an edge rusher. They have a lot of money, I think over 119 million, maybe something like that. So they're gonna have to pay, guys in free agency, and Chaisson, who could be a guy who a team overpays and then realizes he was only good in the scheme, but maybe the Raiders are still able to get him to produce really well. And I think he will end up leaving New England. I think he priced himself out of the Pats' range. And I think he could get, 80, 90, maybe even 100 million this offseason. And a Raiders team that desperately needs, desperately needs good players on both sides of the ball to hopefully get back to competing. I think Chaisson would be a phenomenal fit on this defense to not replace Crosby, but to kind of be their new star edge rusher. But that'll do it for today's video. Hope you guys comment, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. And tell me, what free agency predictions you guys have. Tell me which ones Either I'll get right or wrong. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. But until then, hope you have a great day and bye.